Greetings, fellow wanderer. When we talk about psychology today, we often talk in terms of chemical balances, behavioral hacks, or quick personality tests we take on our phone. But if you go back about a century, psychology looked much less like a cold clinical science and much more like a dangerous, necessary expedition into the human soul. At the center of that expedition was a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Gustav Jung. Jung came from a world deeply rooted in belief and interior tension. His father was a country parson in the Swiss Reformed Church, a man whose faith was quiet and plagued by silent doubt, while his mother was a complex, enigmatic woman who possessed a deep, almost mystical intuition. Growing up between the rigid dogma of the church and the dark, unexplained mysteries of the psyche, Jung was virtually destined to spend his life wrestling with the invisible forces that govern us. Naturally, his early path led him to Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Freud saw in the brilliant Carl Jung his intellectual heir, his chosen protege who would carry psychoanalysis into the next generation. Jung adopted Freud's foundational realization that the human mind possesses an unconscious layer, a realm beneath our awareness that speaks to us through dreams and slip-of-the-tongue symbolism. But that partnership didn't last. The break between Freud and Jung remains one of the most famous rifts in intellectual history. Freud viewed the unconscious largely as a dark basement, a place where we shove our repressed sexual desires and forbidden drives. Jung saw something far grander and far more sacred. Where Freud saw the psyche driven primarily by sex, Jung saw it driven by a broader, deeper push toward psychic wholeness. He couldn't reduce the entirety of human longing, myth, and spiritual seeking down to mere instinctual repression, and so they went their separate ways. What Jung was ultimately trying to do was draw a comprehensive map of the human soul. If you look at this diagram, it organizes the psyche along two main axes: the vertical dimension running from the outer world down to the inner world, and the horizontal division between consciousness and unconscious. At the top, facing the outer world, sits the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate society, our roles, and our public identity. Right beneath that mask is the ego, the center of our everyday conscious awareness. For most people, this top sphere is where they spend their entire lives. It's the small, sunlit island floating above the waterline that we mistakenly call myself. But Jung's primary work was mapping what lies beneath the surface. Directly below the conscious ego, you drop into the personal unconscious. This is where your individual forgotten memories, suppressed experiences, and the shadow reside. All those rejected parts of your personality that you couldn't integrate into your conscious identity. If you travel even deeper toward the inner world, the personal gives way to the collective unconscious. To use Jung's metaphor, if your ego is an island, the seabed beneath your island connects to the seabed beneath every other human soul on Earth. That deepest ancient layer is a shared reservoir of human experience, home to universal archetypes like the anima and the animus, the inner feminine and masculine principles of the soul. And at the very center of the whole diagram, where all these overlapping circles meet, is the self. For Jung, the self isn't just the ego. It is the central organizing archetype of ultimate wholeness, the totality of both your conscious and unconscious mind. The goal of Jungian psychology isn't to stay safe at the top of the persona and the ego, but to journey downward, integrate the contents of the unconscious, and align with the entire system around the self. Down in the collective unconscious reside the archetypes, innate inherited patterns that organize human meaning, motivation, and perception. To clarify how we actually relate to these psychic structures, Jungian analyst Robert Moore proposed a simple but powerful visual, a triangular model of the archetype. At the apex of the triangle is the archetype in its fullness, in this case, the king in his fullness. This represents conscious, differentiated relationship to the archetype. When you are in touch with the king in a mature way, you embody ordered presence, calm, generative authority, and stewarding care, without being swallowed by inflation or grandiosity. At the base of the triangle are the two shadow poles. What emerges when our relationship to the archetype is distorted? On the left, at the positive pole, is identification, what Jungians often call possession. This gives us the tyrant. Here, unconscious identification with the archetype overwhelms the ego. You are not exercising mature authority. You are being driven by an autonomous complex that demands absolute dominance and ultimately devours the very life it is meant to protect. On the right, at the negative pole, is disconnection or deficit. This gives us the weakling. In this shadow pole, you are cut off from the archetype's energy. Agency, responsibility, and structuring power are compromised, leaving you collapsed into helplessness, passivity, and a pervasive sense of being ungrounded. For most of us, when we are not consciously engaged with an archetype, we do not simply sit in one corner of the triangle. We oscillate along the baseline, swinging between weak, impotent collapse into the weakling and reactive defensive control in the tyrant. The aim of inner work is not to eradicate these forces, but to step off that oscillating baseline and move toward the apex, to cultivate a conscious, balanced relationship to the archetype so its energy is integrated into a larger, more stable self. And that brings us to what is perhaps Jung's most famous concept, the shadow. The shadow is simply every part of yourself that you have rejected. Growing up, when a trait, a feeling, or a desire was met with disapproval from your family or society, you didn't destroy it, you exiled it. You shoved it down into the personal unconscious. But nothing in the human psyche can be wished away. What is rejected remains alive in the dark. It stays dormant until its needs go unmet for long enough, or until a moment of stress hits, and suddenly it takes the wheel. We see this when someone snaps unexpectedly or acts out in ways completely contrary to their stated values. This is why Jung spoke of shadow work. Shadow work isn't about eliminating your dark or uncomfortable sides. It's about making contact with them. Jung realized that our dreams are the primary doorway into this dialogue. They are unvarnished messages from the unconscious, showing us precisely what our conscious ego is ignoring. He even developed a practice called active imagination, where a person intentionally steps into a waking dialogue with the images, figures, and symbols of their inner world, sitting with them not to judge them, but to hear what they have to say. For Jung, the collective unconscious was a psychological reality, but it leaned into something profoundly spiritual. Late in his life, during a famous BBC interview, Jung was asked if he believed in God.
And did you believe in God?
Oh, yes.
Do you now believe in God?
Now? Difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
He wasn't offering a simplistic theological dogma. He was speaking as a man who had spent decades guiding thousands of human beings through the terrifying depths of their own inner lives. To Jung, the collective unconscious was the living soil from which divine experiences, sacred symbols, and the voice of the transcendent arise into human consciousness. Carl Jung's work ultimately points toward a simple but demanding truth. We are not nearly as unified as we think we are. Beneath our tidy conscious identity lies an older, deeper layer of the self, one that speaks in symbols, myths, and archetypes shared across the human story. For Jung, the goal of a human life was never perfection, nor was it simple happiness or professional success. The goal was individuation, the slow, courageous process of becoming a whole, integrated self. It is the willingness to face what we would rather ignore, our shadow, our contradictions, our hidden potentials, and to bring them into the light. Whether or not one accepts his framework in a strict scientific sense, Jung offers a profound lens for our modern malaise. He invites us to reclaim our inner life, to take our dreams seriously, and to recognize that real personal growth almost always begins in the very places we are least willing to look. I'd love to hear how these ideas sit with your own reading and journey. Leave a comment below, mind yourself, and keep on wandering.